The crack of his palm against the bar cut through the night louder than the jukebox, louder than the television over the pool table. Glasses rattled, beer sloshed, and the kid, 25, muscles still warm from training, drunk on both applause and alcohol, shouted for everyone to hear, "So this is your Chuck Norris? The legend? An old man who can't even hold a drink." The room stalled. Conversations broke mid-sentence. The baseball commentary blurred into meaningless noise. Cigarette smoke hung still in the light of neon signs, as if even the smoke wanted to see what came next. It was Austin on a sticky Texas evening, the bar humming with the usual end-of-week crowd. The smell of cedar polish, stale beer, and fried food lingered. Country music lay silent inside the jukebox, waiting for coins. Until the boxer slammed the counter, the night had been ordinary. Men finishing pool games, women laughing in small groups, bartenders sliding cold bottles across wood. Now, everything pivoted toward the insult. The kid was known here. Local champion. A couple of belts from small circuits, posters on gym walls. Loud, restless, forever performing. He fed off recognition like oxygen. Tonight his entourage cheered him on, clinking glasses, urging him toward the next spectacle. The alcohol loosened his tongue. The crowd gave him courage. Across the room, in the farthest corner, sat a man who had not come to perform. Chuck Norris wore a plain shirt, sleeves rolled just enough to show wrists browned by years of sun. He had ordered club soda, left a folded tip before the glass even reached him, and watched the ball game without comment. He had no stage, no spotlight, just the aura of someone who didn't need them. But when his name was dragged into the air like bait, the mood of the bar turned. Older patrons straightened, eyes narrowing. The bartender, a woman with iron-gray hair pulled back tight, shot a glance to the corner and back to the kid. She didn't say a word, but her jaw clenched. The boxer raised his voice, grinning wide. "You hear me, old-timer? Or do you only listen when someone yells action?" His friends laughed. A few others forced uneasy smiles. But at one table an old rancher set down his beer and muttered, "Fool doesn't know what he's calling out." Chuck didn't react. He didn't even shift. His eyes stayed on the TV. That stillness was louder than any comeback. The kid mistook it for fear. The older men saw it for what it was. Patience. The boxer wanted more. He slammed down his pint, foam sliding across the counter. "I'm talking to you, cowboy." This time, Chuck lifted his eyes. Not his head, not his shoulders. Just his eyes, steady, clear, sharp as flint. He sipped once from his glass, set it neatly on the napkin, and folded his hands. The room froze. For some, that single glance carried more weight than a punch. The boxer laughed too loud, filling silence with bravado. "He's not even getting up." He stripped off his jacket, handed it to a friend, and strutted toward the center of the floor. The crowd backed instinctively, scraping chairs, leaving space. It wasn't a ring, but it was close enough. Bottles behind the counter mirrored the scene in tiny reflections, dozens of glass eyes watching. Chuck exhaled once, like a man resigning himself to an inevitability. He stood slowly. No scrape of chair, no rush, no theatrics. Just a man rising because the moment demanded it. "I didn't come here to fight," he said, voice calm, even. "I came here to watch the game." That line cut deeper than the insult. A ripple of discomfort moved through the bar. The boxer's grin twitched, but he forced it back. He circled, bouncing on the balls of his feet, trying to turn silence into show. "You're afraid," he spat. "All that movie stuff. Fake. Let's see if you can handle the real thing." Chuck remained where he was, hands loose by his sides. "Standing," he replied. Nothing more. The crowd chuckled nervously. The boxer flushed red. He wanted blood, or at least humiliation, to feed the noise. He shadowed a jab, quick and loud, inches from Chuck's face. Whistles came from the back. Someone muttered, "Don't push him." Chuck's eyes didn't waver. He tilted his head a fraction, like listening for distant thunder. The boxer leaned in too far, showing eagerness instead of control. The silence of the room grew heavier, pressing against skin. The bartender's hand hovered near the phone under the counter. The rancher turned his stool to face forward. A boy in a booth clutched his soda and forgot to breathe. And then the kid stepped forward, weight dropping into his lead foot. The air thinned as if everyone inhaled at once and held it. The next move would decide whether this was only bar talk or the beginning of something no one could take back. Just wondering, where are you watching from? Write it down, bellow. Chairs screeched against the floor as people edged back, giving the boxer room. He wanted a stage, and the bar, half-lit, smoke-stained, heavy with the smell of beer and grease, gave him one. He strutted into the center, shoulders loose, chin tilted high, every step begging for applause. "Come on, old man," he called. "Show them it isn't all camera tricks." Some laughed, too nervous not to. Others stayed silent, eyes flicking between him and the quiet figure, still at the corner table. Chuck rose at last. "No hurry." He slid his chair back gently, as if to keep the room calm, then stood with the deliberate ease of a man who had done this too many times to count. His shirt hung plain, no shine, no patches, nothing that said fighter. Only the way he carried himself said it. "I didn't come here for this," he said, voice level, not raised. The words settled like weight on the room. The boxer smirked. "Hear that? He's backing out already." He spread his arms wide, turning to the crowd as if to gather their judgment. A few of his friends clapped and hollered, desperate to turn silence into momentum. But the rest of the bar was unreadable. Half the faces tight with tension, the other half wary, as though they'd seen how nights like this end. The boxer stepped closer, lowering his voice just enough for it still to carry. "You made a career pretending. I fight for real." Chuck's gaze didn't shift. His hands hung relaxed, shoulders loose. He looked not at the boxer's face, but at his center, hips, feet, the ground where intent begins. "You need them to see you," Chuck murmured. "That's not strength. That's hunger." The boxer's jaw clenched. He jabbed the air an inch from Chuck's chest, fast, loud, a gunshot echo that snapped off the bottles behind the bar. Gasps broke the silence. Still Chuck didn't move. "Afraid to touch me?" the kid jeered. "Or too brittle to risk it?" Chuck only tilted his head slightly, eyes steady. "I won't be the one to start it." That line stung. The boxer barked a laugh, louder than he felt. He shoved Chuck's shoulder with the heel of his hand, light enough to call it a joke, heavy enough to declare war. "Son," came a voice from a corner, an old rancher, words cracked by whiskey and years. "Don't." The boxer ignored him. He bounced on the balls of his feet, weaving lightly, trying to paint the air with menace. His friends shouted encouragement, their voices hollow in the charged quiet. Chuck didn't track them. He watched only the kid, breathing slow, body like stone beneath water, still, but ready. "Touch hands," the boxer said suddenly, extending his palm low, pretending at sportsmanship. Chuck's eyes flicked from the hand to the kid's smirk, reading the cheap trick written plain across his face. "You already decided it won't be friendly," he said. The boxer snapped the offered hand upward into a mock slap across the chest. It made no mark, but the disrespect was sharp enough to cut. Chuck didn't budge. His ribs might as well have been anchored in granite. "You're making me do this," the kid hissed, stepping closer. "No," Chuck replied, voice almost gentle. "You're making yourself." The bartender's knuckles whitened around a bar rag. The boy in the booth leaned forward so far his soda tipped. Every patron became part of the ring. Their silence the ropes, their stares the floodlights. The boxer crouched, weight loaded on his front foot. His fist shot forward, glove arcing toward Chuck's jaw. For an instant, the whole bar inhaled. No one blinked. No one moved. The question carved itself into the moment, sharp and unrelenting. Would the fist land and the legend shatter? Or would the old man's calm prove more dangerous than any youth or speed? The punch came on a straight line, fast enough to raise the hairs on forearms as it passed. The room squeezed smaller around it. The bottles, the neon, the people, everything shrinking to the fist and the face it aimed to rewrite. Chuck didn't step back. He stepped through. The motion was so small, the cameras that weren't there would have missed it. A half-inch slip of the head, a soft turn of the shoulder, the glove sewing past his cheek by a whisper. The kid's elbow overextended by a finger's breadth. That was the opening. And in that narrow door, Chuck entered. No wind-up, no theater. A short punch from the hip, knuckles aligned, the kind of strike you learn late because it doesn't impress a mirror. It landed where the jaw hinges and balance lives. The sound was not a crack, but a thud, like a hand on a hollow door. The boxer's eyes stuttered. His knees forgot the floor, and he dropped to one knee as if the room had tilted. For a heartbeat, no one made a noise. Then the silence broke, not with shouting, but with air returning, gasps, a whispered curse, a glass set down too hard. The bartender's rag froze mid-wipe. The boy in the booth inhaled like he'd been underwater. The old rancher nodded once, as if a math problem had just solved itself. The kid's glove found the floor, smudging a dark crescent in the grain. He blinked hard, trying to drag the world back into a single frame. His mouth moved without sound. He tasted copper. He reached for the rope that wasn't there and touched only empty air. Chuck had already stepped back, hands low, chin neutral, breathing even. He gave the room space, as if yielding the stage to the only actor that mattered now. Choice. "You wanted a lesson," he said, not loud, not cruel. "Here it is." The boxer heard it the way a dog hears thunder. As a threat, he couldn't fight. Pride snapped first. He surged to his feet too quickly and swayed. His friends burst into noise. "You slipped. He sucker-punched you." Explanations tossed like life preservers that couldn't float. One of them reached in to steady him. He shrugged the hand off, jaw flexing. "Lucky shot," he said, voice thick. The words didn't convince him either. Chuck didn't answer. He waited, boot toe marking the invisible seam he would not cross unless the kid pushed him across it. The bar reformed the ring, shoulders squared, stools angled, bodies half-turned to capture whatever came next without missing an exit. The television tried to return everyone to normal with a between-innings insurance commercial. Smiling people, perfect lawns, promises. No one looked. The sound played to a room that had cut its volume to hear something else. Breathing, scuffing shoes, the soft click of a molar biting down on adrenaline. The kid rolled his neck as if it were stiffness and not confusion. He touched his lip, stared at the faint red on the glove like proof of a grievance. "You don't hit like the movies," he said, reaching for a joke that wouldn't come. "That was the point," Chuck said. The bartender finally spoke, low and even. "Enough." It wasn't a plea. It was an offer to stop this where dignity had a chance to sit down beside them. The rancher echoed it with a gravelly, "Take your win, both of you." But pride is a soundproof room. The boxer stepped back into stance, smaller now, tighter, as if speed could sew shut what accuracy had opened. He feinted hard at the body and shot a hook high, the kind meant to crash behind the ear and blur a man's name. Chuck's feet answered geometry with geometry, weight through the floor, line beaten by angle. He caught the hook on the blade of his forearm and nudged, not swatted, so the punch bled out into empty space. Then, almost gentle, a palm heel pressed the sternum and guided the kid a half-step sideways, past the fight and into embarrassment. "You don't need this," Chuck said, and the quiet of it cut more than volume ever could. The boxer's breath sawed. He was fighting two men now, the one in front of him and the one in his head who'd promised him applause. He jabbed spite into the air, quick triplets that looked good to the eye and did nothing to the world. Chuck moved economy, not speed. He walked around the jab like it were fog on a morning road. The crowd shifted again, from appetite to awe to something like concern. The nurse in scrubs eased closer to the gap. The man in the suit slid his wallet into a different pocket, like he might need his hands. Phones stayed down. No one wanted to make this permanent. The kid snapped a kick, a raw, gym-born answer to humiliation. It was hard, committed, the kind that knocks breath out if it lands. Chuck took half a step, not back but in, collapsing the arc. The shin brushed his thigh without confidence. In the same motion he touched the kid's wrist, rotated it a quarter turn, and let gravity remind the arm who owned it. A subtle twist, a map written in joints, and the boxer stumbled to one palm again. 2 beats, 3. He ripped his hand free, furious not at pain, but at being placed. "Don't," he warned, the word ragged. "I didn't," Chuck said, and it was true. He had undone, not inflicted. The bar absorbed that. The technology of the moment returned. The AC humming, ice sighing into a well, the faint rattle of a neon transformer. Life insisted on continuing even when pride argued it shouldn't. The boxer circled, eyes blown wide, looking for a door that didn't label itself exit. He found only the same things: wood, glass, people, and a man who refused to be a villain. He feinted again. Chuck didn't move. He feinted harder. Chuck blinked once. The kid realized there was only one option left that would let him sleep tonight: a clean shot, head or nothing. He set his feet, drew breath, and sprinted down the center line with a cross that emptied the tank. Chuck's reply was a whisper of movement, the kind that seems late until you feel it. Head off the track, shoulder folding inward, hip turning, and a counter that traveled 3 inches because 3 inches were all the physics required. It found the hinge again, not to break it, just to ask it a question. The answer arrived in the legs. They folded. This time the kid caught himself on both gloves, one knee kissing the floor. His chest heaved. The room went utterly still, as if sound itself had been stunned. Chuck stepped back again, and the again mattered. He didn't loom. He didn't chase. He let the young man sit inside the fact that had just happened to him. No excuses, no edits. "Respect," he said, the word shaped like a bridge instead of a blade. "Start there." For a moment, the boxer stared at the boards between his gloves. The oak had been walked on, spilled on, danced on, scarred by thousands of nights that didn't matter. He thought about being 15 and shadowboxing in a cheap mirror that wobbled on a nail. He thought about posters, about a coach's heavy hand on the back of his neck, about a father who'd never once seen him win. He thought about the room around him right now, full of people who would tell the story whichever way he made it end. He pushed to his feet, slow, deliberate. The crowd parted its breath for him. His friends started to cheer too early, and then swallowed the noise when they saw his face. In his eyes sat 2 choices arguing: the one that could close the distance with an apology, and the one that could close it with everything he had left. He raised his hands, and the bar, bartender, rancher, nurse, suit, boy, every bottle, every light, held perfectly still, waiting to learn which part of him would throw the next punch. He pushed himself upright like a man climbing out of deep water, every limb heavy with something more than exhaustion. Pride lifted him before muscle did, his jaw locked, eyes burning red with the double heat of anger and shame. The cut on his lip had stopped bleeding, but the memory of that first fall still clung to his body like smoke. The crowd pulled him up as much as his legs did. His friends were the loudest, voices cracking with a mix of desperation and bravado. Again! Show him! One more shot! They wanted to believe their champion could erase what they had just seen. Their noise wrapped around him like armor patched from paper. The bar itself had changed shape. It wasn't a room anymore. The neon signs and pool tables faded to the edges, and in the center stood two figures framed by breathless strangers. Someone muttered, "He's going to break the boy." Another answered with a shaky, "He has to try." The atmosphere was more coliseum than tavern, every stool a seat in an unwanted arena. The boxer shook out his arms too violently, the movements betraying nerves. His punches no longer looked rehearsed, they looked improvised, wild. He bounced on his feet, trying to summon rhythm, but the beat came out broken. He launched forward, throwing combinations that landed everywhere except their target. Leather sliced air with the sound of failure. Chuck didn't chase or crowd. He stepped back half a pace, leaving just enough distance to make the point. "I'm not stopping you. You are." His face was calm, the faintest crease of a smile at the corner of his mouth. Not arrogance, but something sharper. Control. Hooks whipped wide, jabs stretched too long. The boxer poured effort into speed, but speed without patience is only noise. Chuck leaned away from one strike, turned a shoulder against another, his breathing steady, as if this were sparring in an empty gym. When a punch finally skimmed close, Chuck caught the wrist mid-flight. Not harsh, not a wrench, simply stopped it. He leaned close enough that only the young man heard the words, "You're not fighting me. You're fighting your ego." The kid froze as if struck harder than before. For a single beat, everything in the bar shut down. The voices stilled. Even the clatter of ice in a glass behind the counter seemed to hesitate. His eyes flickered. First rage, then confusion, then something like realization. He tore his hand free with a jerk. Pride stung more than flesh, but the damage was already done. His rhythm was broken, his fury tangled with doubt. He came again, swinging harder, but the energy had drained. His movements slowed, telegraphed. Every strike looked predictable, easy to avoid. Chuck slipped aside almost lazily, like a man stepping off the curb to let a storm pass. The crowd felt it too. No one laughed now, no one jeered. The earlier heckles had dried into silence. All they could see was a boy chasing shadows and a man refusing to humiliate him. Each miss cut deeper than any punch that landed. The boxer's chest heaved, his gloves sagged. Sweat rolled down his temples and blurred his eyes. He lunged once more, but the strike had no teeth left. Chuck didn't punish it. He didn't counter. He simply let the fist pass by and placed one hand gently on the young man's shoulder, steadying him instead of breaking him. That touch was the truest blow of the night. The boxer blinked, stunned not by pain but by what it meant. The fight was no longer his to win. Around them, the bar breathed as one, caught between relief and awe, waiting to see what the kid would do with the lesson carved into him. And in that fragile pause, the air trembled with possibility. Would pride take the wheel again and drag him back into humiliation? Or would he finally understand the weight of the words still echoing in his head? "You're not fighting me. You're fighting your ego." The word hung inside him like a hook. Ego. It didn't bruise, it didn't bleed, but it pulled at him with every breath. He tried to outrun it with motion, bouncing on the balls of his feet, rolling his shoulders, shadowboxing against air as if momentum itself could drown out meaning. But the bar had grown quieter, and quiet has a way of magnifying truth. He snapped forward first because hitting was easier than thinking. A jab, rushed, telegraphed, his shoulder lifting before the glove even left. Chuck saw the beginning before the end. He turned his head, and the fist cut nothing. The kid doubled it, then tripled, but each shot carried less conviction than the last. A hook followed, wide and angry. Chuck's arm angled like a gate, guiding it past. No block, no clash, just a gentle redirection that made the punch look borrowed, not owned. The boxer loaded up across, hips late, breath ragged. Chuck stepped through it, and the glove slid past as if chasing a ghost. The crowd knew now. They stopped hollering, stopped laughing. Their silence was not relief. It was fascination. They were watching a boy unravel in front of them. Somewhere glass clinked on wood, too loud in the hush. The bartender froze mid-wipe, rags suspended. "Breathe," Chuck said, so softly it seemed only the kid could hear. The boxer's eyes burned. He came harder, a body shot, then a kick he'd learned in gyms that confused noise with skill. Chuck smothered the space, shoulder braced, shin brushing harmlessly past. His hands found the boy's triceps like a craftsman, taking measure. Precise, effortless. "Fight me!" the kid barked, voice cracking. Chuck's answer was calm, almost kind. "I am. You're the only one swinging that cut deeper than leather." For the first time, the boy saw himself from the outside. Wild arms, empty lungs, chasing someone who refused to become his enemy. The realization made his punches slower. Each movement dragged, predictable before it began. Chuck slipped them like a man stepping off a curb to avoid puddles. The voices in the bar shifted. Someone whispered, "He's reading him like a book." The old rancher near the jukebox said, low, "No, he's reading his pride." The boxer tried again, desperate. A flurry, high, low, high, more panic than plan. His breath came with a rasp, shoulders climbing toward his ears. The feint fooled no one, not even him. The final hook staggered forward with all the grace of a falling chair. His guard sagged, just a fraction, but enough. The opening gaped, begging to be punished. Chuck let it sit there, untouched. Mercy in the shape of restraint. The boy felt the absence like a slap. Mercy where he'd expected pain. His anger thinned into something sharper. Shame. He roared one last time, pulling from empty wells, and threw a straight. Textbook. Earnest. Hopelessly late. Chuck parried with 2 inches of wrist. The glove slid off into air. Then came the touch. Not a strike, not a shove. A palm on his shoulder, steady, grounded. It pinned him in place, not by force but by finality. It said, "Enough." That single gesture rewrote the room. The fight drained out of the air. No one cheered. No one mocked. People sat in the weight of it, realizing they hadn't come to watch a brawl, but an education. The boxer's gaze darted. Friends who had shouted themselves hoarse now sat stunned, their mouths open, but useless. Strangers wore the quiet recognition of people who had once faced their own lesson and refused to laugh at someone else's turn. The nurse near the wall had her hand half raised, as if she might catch him if he fell. "You can stop," Chuck told him, voice low. "You've already proven enough to the only person that matters." The boy's throat caught. "Who's that?" Chuck's eyes didn't waver. "You." The word slid under his ribs heavier than any blow. He tried one last jab, more habit than intent, but his fist sagged before it landed. His arms fell to his sides. His chest heaved, not with rage anymore, but with the hollow relief of someone who knows the storm is over. The room exhaled. Stools scraped faintly. A glass refilled behind the counter. Life crept back, cautious. The bartender nudged a chair forward with her foot. "Sit," she said gently. The boy looked from the chair to Chuck, then down at his hands, trembling now that pride no longer held them stiff. His friends muttered encouragement, but even they didn't believe it anymore. He hovered, suspended between collapse and surrender. Chuck withdrew his hand, slow and respectful, as though returning a borrowed weight. His face showed no triumph, only the patience of someone who had waited long enough to see another man confront himself. The boxer stood there trembling, while the question formed inside him with brutal clarity. Was he ready to stop performing and admit what everyone else already knew? The bar leaned in, silent, waiting for his answer. He lowered himself onto the chair as if it were a confession booth. The bartender kept her hand steady on the backrest until his weight sank into the wood. His gloves, slick with sweat, hung off his knees like anchors. For a long half-minute, He only stared at the floorboards, scarred planks, each groove a witness to nights of laughter and fights less meaningful than this. His chest rose and fell in uneven rhythm, breath fighting against the silence. "I wanted to prove I was strong," he said, words brittle, scraping his throat raw. "But I see now. I'm still just a kid." No one jeered. The admission sucked all the air from the bar. The boy in the corner booth froze mid-sip, as though even drinking might be disrespectful. The rancher near the jukebox removed his hat slowly, letting the silence crown the kid instead of mocking him. The nurse edged closer, her hands folded, ready to help if collapse came. Chuck didn't move to claim the spotlight. He stayed planted where he'd been, posture balanced, shoulders relaxed. He carried no victory in his face, only patience. In the stillness, the lines on his face looked more like maps than scars, etched by decades, not anger. "Sorry," the boxer muttered, then forced his head up, making sure the apology landed with the room. "I was showing off. For my friends, for strangers. For me, most of all, his friends shifted. The ones who had chanted his name earlier now sat hollow, guilt across their silence. The bartender slid a glass of water forward. It tapped gently against his fingers, and he took it with both hands as if receiving communion. The first swallow steadied him. The second nearly broke him. "You don't owe me anything," Chuck said at last. His voice was quiet, but cut through every corner. "You owe yourself." The boy blinked, the phrase carving itself deeper than any punch. He stared at the gloves, suffocating his hands. With deliberate slowness, he peeled back the Velcro. The sound tore the silence open. One glove dropped into his lap. The other he set on the table, palm upward, like surrender. Around them, the bar recalibrated. Pool cues slid back into racks. Drinks clinked softly, but nobody returned to chatter. The television carried the muted buzz of a baseball game. Irrelevant, its crowd noise mocking the hush. "You were right," the boy said finally. "I wasn't fighting you." Chuck inclined his head. "The hardest fight's the one inside." "You figured it out tonight." For the first time, someone clapped. A single set of hands, slow, deliberate. It spread, one table, then another, until the whole bar filled with applause. But it wasn't wild cheering. It was the applause of people honoring restraint. The boy's shoulders shook. He stood again, bare hands open, eyes raw but clear. "Thank you," he whispered. Chuck moved closer. He placed a hand on the young man's shoulder. Firm, steady, but light enough that it carried no dominance. Then he stepped back, pulled a few bills from his pocket, and slid them onto the counter. The bartender nodded, reading what money couldn't say. "You sure you don't want to stay?" she asked softly. Chuck's mouth curled into something almost like a smile. "Game's over," he said, glancing at the muted television. "At least this one." He walked toward the door, the heat of a Texas night pushing through the frame to meet him. Before leaving, he paused by the boy in the booth, the youngest witness, eyes wide. Chuck leaned slightly, voice low but clear. "Take notes." The boy nodded so quickly his soda spilled. Then the door swung, and Chuck stepped into the dark, vanishing into the hum of crickets. He didn't look back. He didn't need to. Inside, the boxer sat again, gloves abandoned, friends now circling not as fans, but as companions. The bartender set down a bowl of ice and a towel. The rancher started a story about the first bronc that humbled him. The nurse finally laughed at a small joke. The TV rolled credits no one cared about. The kid looked at his reflection in the glass of water. "I thought winning would fix me, but it just makes the mirror louder." He pressed ice to his lip and smirked faintly. "Guess tomorrow I start over." The applause that followed wasn't for Chuck anymore. It was for the boy, for his honesty. It swelled, not chaotic, but steady. And when it faded, the jukebox came alive with a song older than most of the crowd. Some said it was coincidence. Others swore it wasn't. And the night ended not with fists or shouts, but with a quiet truth everyone carried home. Real strength is not in conquering others. Real strength is in conquering yourself and knowing when not to strike.